Welcome back to Sun, Sand, and Sold. As always, Josh Tomey with David Haber, Kyle Haggerty, and we are here to talk about real estate, economics, lifestyle in South Florida. We've got a big show today. A lot to talk about, lot to cover, coming into episodes dealing with what we have previewed in previous episodes, talking about what's going on in construction, talking about what's going on in projects, certainly related to condos, but also commercial of its different iterations. And we could probably spend 5 episodes on this, David, but we're going to try to compress this into the next couple and talk about the things that really matter to people who are listening and watching and understanding, you know, what it is that we're all doing here in South Florida as things are getting more crowded, more expensive, more complicated. Kyle has generously volunteered himself to be, as always, our everyman to help us translate what it means to the average economic buyer and user.
It means that I'm the dumbest person in the room, and that's okay.
That's not always a bad thing. You
Not
kind
the
of like
dumbest, just not necessarily a real estate guru, and you want it explained in a way that the average person can understand.
I do.
By the way, that makes, you said it's a big show?
It's a very big show.
Well, no, that's not how you say it. It's,
Very big show.
no, Ed Sullivan would say big show.
Big show.
Right. Okay.
David is the only one here old enough to have watched Ed Sullivan.
Damn
so
straight.
And there you have it.
I watched it when it was black and white.
No, see, that's Kyle's like, there was black and white.
There was black and white TV.
Yeah,
was.
we used to have to turn the channel
was
like
in
this.
Did you have the console TV? Did you have like
Yeah.
the big cabinet?
We used to, as kids,
It was
we
like
used to sit-
liquor on one side, TV, and Howdy Doody on the other.
We used to sit there, and we used to sit 2 feet from the TV. Our parents used to scream at us that we were going to go blind, so close to the TV. And there were only 3 stations. There was
And you had to
CBS,
tune like the
NBC,
VHF,
and
UHF antenna.
No, we just went like this between the 3 stations, and our parents would say, "You're going to break the."
Did you have the rabbit
thing."
ears? Did you have to like adjust?
Yes.
And then you got to hold it and put your leg up to the light.
That was a different kind of TV. Kyle.
It's a different era. It was a nice, quiet
Next subject.
time. You used to ride your bike around town, you know. You didn't have to chauffeur your kids everywhere.
It was an easier time.
It was a nice time.
And now parents just get to hand the kid the iPad.
Yeah. It's
Done.
kind of sad.
Done and done. All right. Well,
All right, let's get to real estate, eh?
Well, look, before we dive
For
headlong into that,
for my Canadian viewers, let's get to the real estate, eh?
let's get to the strata.
Okay.
Isn't that what they call condo associations in Canada? Stratas?
I don't know. You're the international expert.
I think they do. Heard you had a nice lunch today.
Oh, yeah. Omakai in Wynwood. They have another location in Coconut Grove, but they have a preset menu that's amazing.
Is it just me, or are there like a lot of Japanese influenced restaurants that have sort of hit Miami? It seems like
A lot of fusion.
Everything has become like an omakase restaurant. I mean, all like a lot of hot ones are.
There are so many new restaurants in South Florida. It's as if the New Yorkers brought high prices and fantastic cuisine down to South Florida.
When I moved here 20 years ago, getting a really good dinner was actually a challenge. I mean, it was like there was a handful of places. You know, it was like the Joes, and you knew the staple institutions, but like the really good, unique places or any hole in the wall that was just awesome it just didn't exist.
There are so many great restaurants in South Florida now.
The
It's
pizza
really,
here
it's
is
amazing.
Pizza here is not good, though.
What's your pizza go-to, Kyle?
Well, that's because
I'm from
you're Chicago
Right.
deep dish
Deep
pizza.
dish pizzeria.
I mean,
We're going to get into the debate of whether that's even
Okay.
pizza or not. You know, where I'm from, that's casserole.
Okay.
That's
yeah.
not pizza.
Yeah.
But it is delicious. I mean, I
is.
won't say it's not good. I'm a little bit of a Mike's guy. You know.
Yeah.
Yeah. How about you?
Well, for my sisters, I'm going to say this: Gloria's Pizza in the Bronx.
Oh well, that's not exactly a quick lunch in Miami.
No.
The pizza down here, I just dusted.
I'm not supposed to eat pizza
hot
because I'm
sauce.
getting too fat. So no pizza for me.
Well, we have a very serious ex-athlete coming on the show later who will make all of us look badly that way. So
Not you. You're a major weightlifter. I was contemplating this morning as I was thinking about what I was going to say today. I'm going to put a shout out to Josh's legs because he does. Is it 5 plates on each side or 6 plates?
that's when I'm feeling really saucy.
Yeah, but 6 plates is 245, 260 on each side plus the bar.
Whatever it is, I'm limping afterwards and have
Yeah.
the
It's
aspirin
almost
ready.
It is impressive when someone can leg press 550 to 600 pounds.
Can our fans
I can
watch
only
it?
do like 150 pounds, and even then my back hurts. So
That being said, I'm going to offer David an out on that because he's usually doing it on the phone at the same time. So I
I'm
think it's
always
actually,
texting while I'm
I've
working
worked out with Dave, and it's like watching somebody literally have conference calls while he's lifting weights. So I think
There's
you get an
nothing
out
wrong
on
with that.
He's the ultimate multitasker.
That's right. All right, let's get to.
Let's do it. Let's dig into this. We're wandering all over the place. We're on the bright line headed north, and we need to stop at the
Again,
station. No, we're not.
again with the bright line. Jeez, you won't let it go.
I'm going to leave it alone.
You will not let it go.
I will never ever fly to Orlando again because of Brightline.
Okay.
No, it's fantastic.
I will never fly to Orlando.
And as we had in our previous guest, the
Your arms would get tired if you flew to Orlando.
all right, look, we're talking about.
Do you like my shirt today? I wore a particularly colorful shirt just for you.
Actually, I will. It's lovely. However, I would actually say that's probably the most muted shirt you've worn on the show so far. You were very punchy. I mean, if you look at sort of our theme colors, they've aligned more with that. It's
But this is, I think, octopus.
somewhere between Hawaiian.
Octopi.
It's
Is it octopi?
Octopi.
My octopus teacher, by the way, great documentary. If you
Ah,
guys haven't seen it.
fantastic.
Yeah. All right, but
All right.
we're on octopi already, which means we are way off topic.
But we digress. Okay, let's get back to real estate.
Look, here's the reality. Buildings are, to some extent, a living, breathing organism. They age the way people age. And as they age, they need care. That's nothing new. What we've obviously seen over the last few years in South Florida in particular, and certainly the focus on it because of the tragedy in Surfside, has been about how, in particular, residential buildings maintain themselves over the course of time. And I think right at the get-go here, we need to differentiate between a condo association, where people buy individual units, a multifamily where people are renting units, and then commercial property that's more typical to Class A or retail, where you've got obviously a different configuration there. But a lot of them are subject to similar laws. If you're in a building, Florida Building Code dictates a recertification process that most buildings have to comply with. And obviously on the condo side, we've seen new laws passed over the last couple of years here in Florida that dictate a much more aggressive process to ensure that condo associations are reserving for capital infrastructure repairs and replacement over time. And again, a lot of that driven by the tragedy in Surfside that, David, you and I both had a fair amount of media time around that, you in particular, even on a national basis. And maybe, I think starting with condos, because we know it's probably the heaviest weight in the market, your perspective as an attorney, how has it shifted over the last few years? Because obviously when that happened and those laws got passed, not only were you a voice of the industry, you have a business that has been driven by condos for many years.
First, for the layperson, multifamily is apartment buildings.
Right, rentals. Right.
Yeah, rentals.
Because
So-
Not as common here in Miami. Right.
We thought it was
although it's
growing.
getting more common, and of course we've talked about it in other podcasts we've done, other sessions, about how the rental market has gone through the roof, and the average millennial can't even afford to pay the $3,000 to $5,000 in rent for a 1 to 2 bedroom apartment. But to answer your question, I think it's twofold. You have a real clear distinction between high-end condominiums, luxury condominiums, where it may be the third, fourth, or fifth residence of the owner, and whatever the increase in price for reserves, which now you cannot waive based on the new laws, they just pay it. And of course, the value of their units has doubled or tripled, or in some cases quadrupled from what they paid. On the other hand, you have the middle class market of older condominiums that are 25 to 60 years old, where they did not reserve for the last 30 years and they kicked the can down the road. And now they have special assessments anywhere from $5 to $50 million, and a lot of concrete decks, a lot of balconies, a lot of pool decks, a lot of garages. And for those people, it's a financial strain. 100% it's a financial strain, because when they bought the condos and when they've been living in the condos, they expected to be paying a certain amount of money, and now it's almost doubled. So, they can't afford it. And if they leave, they have nowhere to go because the market is so tough on multifamily apartment buildings, and single family homes have gone up in price. And then you have the condominiums that simply it doesn't make economic sense to put that kind of money in. And you have a lot of developers that are ready to, I don't want to say poach or pounce upon, but land on the water is unique in South Florida and it's very scarce. And so they are ripe for terminations. And we've talked about that, and we should have a whole show on terminations. But the reality is the termination market is going to get bigger and bigger and bigger because of the problems of the new regulations, the new laws, the new requirements to reserve, the cost of special assessments for these certifications, and the fact that these owners can't afford it.
So let's pause for a second, and I think for the lay person, right? So condominium associations, you have a maintenance fee. So monthly or quarterly, you're going to pay for the operations of that condo. There are typically two budgets at work at the same time. One is an operations budget, and that, for all intents and purposes, you're paying to keep the lights on, paying to keep staff in place, paying
insurance,
all the service contracts, all the insurance, essentially the day-to-day operating
the
life
elevator,
of a condominium
pool,
association,
all that stuff,
all of those basic expenses. Simultaneous to that, there is a reserve budget. That reserve budget is, for lack of better words, a savings account for the condo association to pay for repairs that they don't yet need but will in the future, and therefore are putting money away. Not dissimilar to how a single family homeowner might, put away a little bit of money to say, I don't need a new roof now, but I need a new roof in 10 years, and I'm not going to, wait for that cost to come. I'm going to put away a couple $1,000s a year so that when the time comes, I'm ready. And that really is the concept of reserves. You identify all the things that need to be replaced on a capital basis, and then essentially fund it on a yearly basis so that by the time you need to replace it, you have enough money to do that.
The difference between a single family home, though, and a condo is in a single family home, you're not required to do it, number one. And number two, I don't know anybody that puts away $500 a month for 10 years to pay for the roof that they're going to need.
If they were following great economic practices, that would be the case. But you're right.
You're out of your mind. They don't. It's never going to happen. But in a condo, the point that Josh is making is you have no choice. It's not optional anymore. It's required that you put aside that money.
But is it a building fund or is it reserves?
It's reserves for repair and replacement.
And it's a restricted fund. So legally, when you're putting money into a reserve fund in a condominium in Florida, it can only be used with certain legal exceptions for the purpose it was intended. So if you have a fund, what you're going to do is you're going to identify the aspects of the building that need to be funded, and that reserve can only be used for those particular fixtures. Right?
For example, let me give you an example.
Sure.
Let's say your operating budget, the average price is $1,000 a month, and the whole building is $1 million.
Right.
And you run over by $250,000. You can't go and raid the reserves in order to pay that differential.
Not to say some associations in the past have not done that outside of law.
I was going to ask you about that. So I live in a condo. Is my association making those decisions, and are they experts or have the professional expertise to make it? Who's making a decision on the amount of money I'm currently making and what they're going to ask me for in the future?
The board.
I find that to be a problem.
Well, and up until Surfside, and I think it's one of the unique aspects of this particular topic for us here in Florida. Up until Surfside, and the legislation that immediately followed it, there were provisions of the law, and in this case, it's Statute 718 under Florida law that said you can actually choose not to fund the reserve if you get a certain portion of the residents to say we agree with the idea of not funding or partially funding. It was basically a way to keep the maintenance rates lower and saying we're going to take the risk on ourselves that when it comes time to have to make these capital expenditures, we will likely have to special assess, meaning we're going to have to add on to the normal assessment and come out of pocket to replace the roof or repave the driveway or do concrete restoration work, replace the air conditioning, cooling towers, whatever that happens to be. What happened in Surfside put a spotlight on the idea that boards who were taking that out or associations who were taking that out wound up never doing the work because they never wanted to come out of pocket. Now, we don't know that that's what happened in Surfside, but we do know that Surfside, that the Champlain Towers had issues. We know that they were
the swimming pool or something.
That they were underfunded. There were some water penetrations, and again, I don't want to get we don't know what happened, but there is suspicion that the lack of A, funding, and B, as a result, the lack of work being performed may have been part of that cause.
Well, I think it was the pool deck was leaking, and the original design was flawed, and also allegedly the original construction had some flaws as well. But it was kind of like a triple witching hour. Everything went wrong. But the point is that you could do things in the past that you can't do now, and it's caused buildings and owners to have to pay more money. Simply put, it is requiring owners to pay, in some cases, 50% more, in some cases, 100% more. And that's not including the fact that insurance costs have gone up from 50 to 100%.
Labor costs, especially post-pandemic, equal.
Yeah, so you have your maintenance has been rising. Your average every month maintenance has risen because of labor costs and insurance. So that's risen by 50%. And then you have this second budget for reserves that you can't waive anymore. So it's really a double whammy for these people. And so people who are on fixed incomes or who came to Florida.
I was just about to ask you about that. I have a legal question for you when it comes to that. I know, right? Exactly.
This is not a legal opinion.
Okay, fair enough. There is a disclaimer. You have a
Big
person.
Disclaimer.
You have someone paid for their condo. They don't own it. They've been in it for 20 years. They're on a fixed income. And now they're telling them that for the year, they got to pay $150,000. And that was nowhere near what they had to do before.
Common story, by the way. That's probably not that far off from reality in a lot of cases.
So legally, and again, I understand you're not giving legal advice, but what is it that you say to people like that? Are they getting kicked out of a condo that they have already paid for?
It's a great question, and here's the answer. Number one, the condo looks for funding from loans from banks in order to take that special assessment of $15 million, which may be $150,000 per unit, and spread it out over 5 to 7 years so it's more manageable. And the condominium uses as a backup, meaning as security. They can't mortgage the condo. All they can do is lien the right to collect that special assessment money. So the unit owner pays over the 7 years the amount of money that's attributable to their unit plus the interest payment on a monthly basis in order to make it palatable. Other people in the condo may say, I don't want to pay the interest. I'm going to pay the whole $150,000 right now. But for the owner who can't afford to pay right now, hopefully the loan is of a long enough period of time to allow them to make the payments. But to answer the other part of your question, which is what happens if they can't even afford the 5 to 7 year, they have two choices: sell the condo, or if they can't make the payment, a lien is filed by the association against the unit owner. If the unit owner doesn't pay the lien amount, then the association has the right to foreclose, just like a bank, and they can be thrown out of their unit.
Even though the unit is paid for.
Correct.
Yes.
Are you kidding me?
Nope.
I am trying not to kid you, but sometimes I like to kid you, but not right now.
Oh, wow.
And this is part of the fundamental housing crisis we're facing, because it's in, I think we talk about fixed income. We're thinking about a retiree. We're thinking about, somebody who bought 20 years ago. The reality is this actually can impact anybody. You could be a young professional couple making a couple $100,000 a year, and you bought a condo for $500,000, and the assessment was $2,000 a month. And that's about average for here in Miami. Right. And that was affordable.
Now it's 4,000.
Right. And so now, as David talked about, the incremental costs of things like insurance and labor have created massive increases on their own. And then all of this that we're talking about is tied backwards into Florida Senate Bill 4D passed in 2022.
4D as in David.
Or is that 2021? I think it was 2021.
I missed all of 2020 through 2022 because of COVID, and I don't remember what year is what.
But it was passed and then further clarified with a follow-up bill that was sort of a glitch bill, Bill 154. And what ended up happening was, number one, the state closed the loophole in saying you can waive reserves. So right. you can't not save anymore, number one. Number two, in addition to that, you need to now reserve for structural elements. So the elements of the fundamental structure of the building, which was never a requirement before. Most of the reserve budgets that you saw before covered things like roof,
paving,
pool, paving, painting. There was a pretty standard list of 7 or 8 items that sort of everybody did. And you bring a reserve expert or an engineer in who would assess that. They would say, here's how many years of useful life I'd expect out of this component. Here's how many years of useful life left. And we're going to set the funding accordingly. And you reprice it as time goes on so that it's as accurate as possible. Mm-hmm. And it's never perfect science, but you're at least doing what you should do. The problem was
science is supposed to be perfect, but in fact, science is an art.
That was more art. And the problem back then even was the fact that most associations, and David, you could probably corroborate this, most associations were not saving for the things that were ultimately going to cost them the most, which was structural rehabilitation.
Right. Yeah, and they would also manipulate. They would not get reserve studies done on time. They would fudge the numbers. It was to answer one of your earlier questions of, can I trust the people making these decisions? Right. Well, let me tell you something. Since Surfside and the tragedy there, sitting on a board has liability, real teeth and real liability if you are, reckless in how you handle the association's funds. In fact, the state attorney's office in Miami-Dade, and I don't know about other counties, is really looking into some of these condominium boards of directors that have had control for 15 and 20 years.
Starting to set term limits on that.
They've set term limits, but some of these people, they don't have elections. People can't get information. One of the people on the board runs the management company, or
they've heard they do,
or the maintenance, and then they're getting paid on
their cousin got their insurance policy.
Right.
I do have a question for both of you, and Josh, I'd like you to take it from the resident's perspective, and Dave from the association perspective. You talk about all these things, decisions that were made in Tallahassee about not being able to waive reserves and all this other stuff. From both perspectives, at the end of the day, when you flush it all out, were the right decisions made for both the resident as well as for the association and building owners?
So my experience has been 20 years in the property management side, so a lot of direct day-to-day resident interaction. Mm-hmm. And I think in principle, it was the right move. I think there were some loopholes that needed to be closed, because you're essentially putting that decision in the hands of people who have a direct financial benefit or loss as a result, perceivably as a result of it. Now, you could take it from a higher perspective and say, but it's their own asset, and so therefore wouldn't they want to maintain it properly? But I remember having conversations, and this is a very specific conversation. I was a property manager. It was one of my first properties, and one of my residents was probably at the time 85 years old. And this association wanted to waive reserves. And I was making a case philosophically as a young go-getter property manager to say that's not the responsible way to finance. And he said to me, look at me in the eyes. He looked at me in my eyes.
I won't be here by that.
And he said, you're talking about me saving for things that I will not be alive to see. So the answer is no.
Yeah, because why you kick the can down. You know what it reminds me of? There's a game we played as a kid where they would put like 8 chairs, 4 on each side, and you would go around.
Ring around the posy, right? Or musical chairs, right? Or Duck, Duck, Goose.
And we would go around, and one person would end up without a chair. So it's almost like you're playing the game, and the guy at the end who walks in 15 years later when the work needs to be done, he's the guy without a chair.
And that's exactly what's happened now. Is what's happened is the age of this market has reached a point that a lot of these buildings has reached a critical.
Rosy.
I'm sorry. It's been a long time. I was not.
Black and white TV before the internet.
Nursery rhymes aren't my thing. But it's reached a point, these buildings, where they are 30, 40, 50, 60 years old. Construction quality has changed. We're going to talk to our guest about that. And now this is the proverbial piper getting paid, because these costs have been deferred for decades. These buildings cannot maintain themselves. And so now they're in a condition where now we're starting to see issues, again, ostensibly like at Champlain Towers and Surfside, where you may be risking things like structural instability. One of the problems, and I'm sure David has an opinion on this as well, is we've got a division, the division that regulates condominiums, Division of Business Professional Regulation in Tallahassee, has a division for condominiums. And relative to the size of the state and the number of condominiums, and we're coming up on 2 million condominium units in the state of Florida.
Woefully underfunded, that division.
It's tiny. I mean, it is not much more than a department within a department. And there was no enforcement mechanism. So it's not like anybody at the state, despite being theoretically a regulated industry, there's nobody at the state who was looking at every budget saying adequate, inadequate, et cetera. There's certainly been calls to say every board should have some sort of professional advisor or even a professional board member appointed by the state or not that helps guide boards, because, again, you're a board member. You've been elected by your peers, by your literal neighbors, and you have to be the bearer of bad news. And this is not different than politics in any other field, which is
literal neighbor is really a physical neighbor.
Right. And so you have to be the one I have to be the one to knock on David's door and say,
I'm going to charge you more money.
I'm going to charge you more money. Now, what do you think their reelection chances are? Now, what do you think the
0.00.
What do you think the election chances are for somebody who says no increases? As a property manager, and then as I became a management executive, I used to take a huge amount of issue with boards who would focus on keeping maintenance rates the same year over year, despite the fact that even with simple inflation, things could not possibly stay the same cost. And for them,
that was to get reelected.
It was a point of pride to say we didn't increase maintenance rates this year, 0% increase. And the reality was
people loved it.
They loved it. And the reality was they were doing their own association members a great disservice, because what was happening was, how did they do that? Despite the fact that operating costs were actually going up, they would whittle down the amount they contributed to reserves until it was zero. And then when the reserves hit zero, then they would start to whittle away against certain operating costs and try to negotiate on fees and contracts and this and that. Maybe sometimes even taking an insurance deductible from 3% to 5%. I mean, I've seen every version of budget manipulation there is. And what you wind up with is an underinsured, underfunded building that is in grievous need of repair. And a lot of boards put the blinders on. And so now, to David's point, years later, now the bill comes and says, well, now you have to. And now those options don't exist. And by the way, part of Senate Bill 4D also basically said, if you as a board member ignore this directive, you're now being held, and I believe this is the case, personally liable, in addition to whatever corporate liability exists for the condominium association. So now you've got a chilling effect on who even wants to be on a board.
Not me.
Let alone get people to run for that who have any sense of expertise of what it is. And that was, listen, I think one of the issues in condominiums has always been, when you have resident board members, you're asking non-experts to make expert decisions.
Which is the point I was
and
making.
That's when property managers, attorneys have to come in, but you also have to do what they say, right? And that's been where
that's part of the business judgment rule, is following the advice of your experts rather than going rogue. And while it was a shock to the system of the economics of condominiums and how they had to be taken care of, there were so many problems, from the boards that didn't want to increase budgets or reserve, who were staying on longer than they should have, and not having any personal liability or criminal liability for certain things that they might do, to the engineering and requiring reports to be submitted to the jurisdiction, whether it be city or county, as well as the funding for all of this. I think they did a good job, but there were not only loopholes, there are ripple effects through the industry.
I would even say the entire market.
Right. That's what I meant, that it changed the dynamic of real estate market for condominiums. And there are further ripple effects that they haven't yet addressed. For example, terminations are going to go up, but with the 90% requirement, and you can't have 5% dissenting, you end up with a situation where a developer may take control of 75% of the units, and they don't want to spend the money to fix the condo. They want to knock it down.
Right.
But
So I think, and I wrote an article about this, that they need to reduce the percentage required to approve of a termination to 80% and increase the number against it to 10 or 15%. And that's the kind of ripple effect of some of these laws. And they did try to fix it with the most recent legislation, and they're going to have to fix it again. One of the things that they're going to need to do, which Josh touched upon, is they're going to have to fund the division of condominiums. Really fund it.
Right. Right now, it's $4 per unit per door. So you can imagine, I mean, it's a tiny little contribution. It's not insignificant when you look at the total number of units, but think about the size of
They
our
don't
state.
even get the money. It goes to other parts of the budget. They're not even getting it.
Think about the dozens, if not hundreds of billions of dollars of condominium real estate in the state of Florida. And let's say there's 2 million units. You're talking about $4 per unit per year in funding to the division. So you're talking about a maximum at this point of an $8 million budget direct contribution. Obviously, there's some tax money that goes into that as well, but it's very, very limited.
And they have less than 20 investigators for the entire state for how many million?
2 million doors, right? Coming up on 2 million doors. I think it's 1.7, 1.8 right now. And that's just, I mean, you look at the number in development, it's going to be 2 million overnight.
So you talk about, I guess, what I would call mass terminations. Okay. So are people going to be displaced, or is it going to create an opportunity in another sector of the market for them to live?
Well, then we get to the issue of affordable housing. And what did we call that?
The missing middle.
The missing middle. Last week we talked about, or whatever episode, we talked about the missing middle.
Right.
We talked about needing affordable housing. What's going to happen is the people in the condos are going to go into the multifamily apartments, which they can't afford right now.
Right.
The people that were in those apartments, as the prices get higher, they're going to have to go to affordable housing. We don't have enough affordable housing.
To begin with.
We don't have the missing middle taken care of. So again, what's going to happen is what we discussed in the recent episode of tremendous divergence between the super rich and the people without. And that's not healthy for South Florida. It's not healthy for the economy. It's not healthy from a social perspective. And hopefully we'll be able to talk to the mayor about that and her initiatives to create affordable housing.
Right.
And it's not healthy because the only places that those people will be able to go is far away. And if they work and they're not retirees, they'll be an hour to hour and a half commute because we don't have mass transit. And these are the problems.
Are we talking Broward? Are we talking West Palm Beach?
We're talking all of it. You're talking about the one place that people move in Palm Beach County, Broward, and Dade is they move west.
Right.
They keep moving west. And of course they keep extending into the Everglades
the urban
further.
Development boundary.
Yeah, because they have there's
environmental
choice.
impacts. Even, I mean, thinking about this.
Think about all the ripple effects that we're talking about.
When we look at a bill like Senate Bill 4D and the Clarification Bill 154, to David's point, there are ripple effects so far beyond just condominium. And so, Kyle, I'll give you another example. So we've talked before on the show about how there's a lot of rental market within condominiums here in South Florida. So condominiums have dominated that multi-dwelling unit space, multiple units inside the same building. And for years, especially, when Miami was even more transient, even more seasonal than it is now, you would have a lot of renters in condominium associations. So a unit owner would buy it and rent it out, whether all year, part of the year, et cetera, and extremely common and remains extremely common. So what happens for a condominium owner who's renting their unit and their costs go up by 100%?
The rent goes up.
Well, they have to pass that cost on to their renter. So it drives the rent up. And to David's point, now you have renters in those condominiums who can no longer afford it. but you're also forcing the market upwards, because what do multifamily owners do when the rental economy is shooting through the roof? Well, they're going to start to match that, because if all you have to do is move across the street to a multifamily and they say, well, that 2-bedroom unit equivalent in a multifamily with $6,000, maybe we're gonna target it so that it's approachable, but we're gonna make it equally unaffordable, because we now
we're
have
going
the
to charge
opportunity.
$4,000 instead of $2,500, and then those people can't afford to live there, and now you have the guy who's in, or lady who's in the $6,000 unit going to the $4,000 unit, which used to be $2,500, and then the person who was paying $2,500 has to leave. Where are they going?
Right. And I think
where are my kids going?
Right. And I think what, part of what we all have to recognize is that the safety net that has been probably artificially cast over our region, and I think it's a blind spot for us. Why are we not suffering more now? 2, 3, 4 years out of the pandemic, 2, 3 years post Surfside legislation, we've had this massive influx from other communities like New York, like Silicon Valley, that can afford it. So that's where a lot of these rents are going. That's where a lot of these condos are going. How durable that is irrelevant to the affordable housing conversation. But had that circumstance not arisen, had Surfside happened, but the pandemic had not, I think we might already be sitting inside a condo market collapse. That didn't happen, but it doesn't mean it won't.
Well, as I recall from the 1980s, there was a show called Rich Man, Poor Man with Peter Strauss and my buddy Nick Nolte. And I think we're approaching a rich man, poor man scenario. And it's, as a resident of South Florida who cares about the community, it's a frightening concept of just having rich man, poor man.
And even if you don't care about the community, and let's play devil's advocate and say, I don't care about my community, or it's not really my community.
Or the 85-year-old guy who says, I'm not going to be around, so I don't care.
Who cares, right?
What really is happening is that lack of affordable housing, and as part of these ripple effects, is driving people out of the centers of the city. And therefore, labor is becoming more scarce and more expensive in those cities. So prices for everything that even the middle class are paying within the city are going through the roof. And whether it's condo fees or rent or just basic goods and services. So that's
expensive.
So that's all. So that
gasoline.
So that's all
car
going up.
insurance.
And so to segue into our guest, because all of this ultimately starts to come down to, how are we executing around these required repairs and changes, new buildings, old buildings? This is really now going to become the economic driver in terms of how affordable it can become, staying in compliance, how it's financed, how it's built. David, I know you've got some questions in terms of how can automation, how can AI begin to impact?
I'm going to throw some curveballs about mechanical construction and prefab construction, and also, I went to a seminar for the Construction Law Institute, and all I can tell you is that they're going to start building. They are building with machines all over the world, and they scan the floor, and they do the walls, and they do the concrete, and they do the bricklaying, and it's all done with mechanical machines, and it's all done through software. So that's going to change the cost.
But will it change the cost? It will change the cost of executing. Will it change the cost of procuring?
They're going to take all that profit.
And Jonathan Weislow, who's going to be joining us, I think has a unique perspective, because he focuses on project management. So he sees general contracting, he sees engineering, he sees legal, he sees property management, and has to interact with all those. And to say, are we yet coming together? And is anybody worried about what happens at the end of the day when these pieces come together, about long-term affordability, about sustainability, about all of the impacts that we're talking about?
Wait till we get Joe Knapp on, who's an insurance broker, and we start talking about, is the government and are the insurance companies, are they going to continue to take the risk of people building on the water, or are they going to say, with beach erosion, with king tides, with global warming,
with construction defects,
are we going to insure on the water, or are we going to say to people, you want to live on the water? Great. But if something happens and there's one of the 20 new hurricanes that are allegedly coming this year. And every year there's more and more.
We've had a Cat 5 pass through the Caribbean already.
Right.
And
So are we going to take the risk as a country, and are we going to take the risk as an insurance company, or are we going to say, you owners who want to live there, good luck. But if you lose it, you're self-insured the whole way. That's going to change the market.
So for someone who is currently renting and they're listening to this and they're thinking about buying, taking that next step, based on everything that we just talked about, what information do they need to be equipped with before making that final decision to buy something if they want to leave the rental market?
So we deal with this a lot on the management side, and part of the state's effort has a little bit more buyer beware stuff, right? So here are the things. There's some good websites out there, and we'll throw a couple up in post to give people some good public access information. But it's condominiums have always been required to disclose their budget, their governing documents, et cetera. In certain counties now, there is more fair disclosure requirements. So Miami-Dade led the charge in the state of Florida to say there's now a website where you not only have to provide all that information to the general public, you also have to provide information about essentially the current status of the condominium relative to repairs, relative to reserves, so it becomes much more transparent. What we don't know yet is that this is relatively new. What we don't know yet is the impact that's actually having. Is that actually having an impact? Is that information that's being both disseminated and digested, or are we just ticking a box?
Well, I can tell you that as our law firm, Haber Law, that does real estate closings for individual owners who are looking to buy a condominium, we tell them to look not just at the budget, what are the reserves? How much has the association gotten in insurance so that they're not underinsured? There should get a copy of the reserve study or the engineering study in order to make sure that the building is, even if they haven't special assessed yet, what are the defects in the building? I talk to people. One of my friends who is a big real estate broker down on South Beach, John Lennon, used to say, I'm selling the view. Dora Puig also, I'm selling the view. Well, I always tell people, if you want to know how especially in an older building, if you want to know how a building is, go into the garage.
Right.
Go look at the columns. Go see how this building was taken care of, not just the view, because you're buying the view, but you're getting stuck with the cost of fixing the building.
And I would probably close by saying that's roughly equivalent to somebody buying an ultra luxury automobile. For those who can afford it, how much attention do they pay to what it's going to cost to maintain it and gas it? And the answer is not a lot. You want a Ferrari, you're buying a Ferrari. So you want the view, you buy the view. The problem is the economic impacts of this are so significant, it may even begin to affect even those prospective buyers, but probably more importantly, and to our topic, it absolutely is impacting what middle class we do have that are existing within these thousands of condominium associations in Florida, and the ripple effect that's having on the rest of the real estate market. So we're going to take a break right now. We're going to welcome John Weislow in a moment. This is Sun, Sand, and Sold. Please check us out on YouTube at Sun, Sand, and Sold, as well as Apple and Spotify. We'll be back in a moment.